Hello, every pony. This is Nightlife again, bringing you chapter 4 of An Affliction of the Heart. This chapter is titled Fruition, and it's by an anonymous Pegasus. Now, without further ado, let us begin. Kuno stared at the dark wall of her room. Warden had brought her back into the room an hour previously. From what she assumed could only be his bedroom. Kuno had feigned sleep while delighting in the sensation of her strength slowly returning. The gnawing in her stomach had receded, and was lingering on the knife's edge of pain and agony. It hurt to move, but she was healing, and she was getting stronger. It would appear the Pegasus was more fond of his captive than he let on. Kuno had been staring at the wall, opposite the magic mirror, for the better part of an hour because she was listening with every fiber of her being for the sounds of Warden moving about the house. She had been certain she had felt the vibrations of him heading for his bedroom to sleep for the night. But she had to be absolutely certain he wasn't watching at the magic mirror before she made her move. When she was certain that Warden was in his bedroom, Kuno quickly rolled over onto her hooves and slipped off the bed. With her wings free up, she twisted her hoof to rest underneath her wing, and then stretched the limb out so that the spring fell from underneath and onto her hoof. Clever girl. The changeling wrinkled her nose at the sensation of the spiral shape that had been etched into the membrane there. Her wings were far less fragile than they appeared. Although malleable in the center, the outward edges were hard enough that some changelings had been known to whittle the forward edges into blades. Ooh, now that is nasty. With the spring and hoof, it says hand, but fuck you, anonymous Pegasus, I'm going to go full brony here. With the spring and hoof, Kuno began the delicate process of unwinding it. There was a surprising amount of steel in that short coil, and Kuno was glad. She would need all she could get. After she had the spring unwound, she straightened out the lengths as best she could, and then began to neatly fold it. She wiggled the pieces in place carefully, over and over, until the wire itself gave in to the constant deforming and snapped in half. 3 times she did this, separating the wire into 4 distinct segments. The changeling then began to shape the wire, folding each piece in half and then twisting it slightly, using teeth, hoof, and even part of the sink tap to get the spirals nice and neat. Once she had the 4 pieces in the right shape, she pursued them carefully, selecting the 2 that were the best for what she wanted. The 2 pieces that she selected, now rigid and straight, were tucked carefully back under her wing for safekeeping, and the other 2 pieces were stashed under her mattress in case she was found out. One of them to find, one for me to keep, Kuno whispered to herself, half because of half because of smug exposition, and half because she just wanted to hear her own voice. Which, if you haven't used this audio recording set, it's a different experience to hear your voice the way the viewer does. It's very helpful, actually. With her tools in place, the changeling dropped herself back down onto her bed, and then began to fiddle with the lock that still weighed heavy on the collar around her neck. That was perhaps Warden's first mistake, giving her time to work at her own lock. He should have taken the lock with him each time he left her alone. Kuno laid herself out on her side, freeing up her hooves, and then held up the 2 pieces of twisted wire, inserting them by feel into the padlock and beginning to jiggle them around slowly and carefully. It would take a lot of trial and error to get the correct combination of pressure to unlock the padlock, but she was patient, and she had all night. By morning, Kuno had managed to unlock the padlock on her neck a total of 5 separate times. She was becoming quite good at it. At least, and the last try only took her 5 minutes to set the tumblers right and get it to spring open. The victory had cost her one of her picks, though, snapped when she twisted and turned it too hastily. Unfortunately, that was all the practice she could afford. Celestia's brilliance was rising in the east, and she had run out of time. One moment. Kuno carefully placed her 2 picks back in that little nook between her wing and her back, pressing her wing down so the membranes would deform over them and keep them in place. With that done, she retrieved the broken pick and the single remaining whole pick. I really need a pop shield. And then rolled over to face the mirror, beginning to work at her lock again. The changeling was unsure how long she lay like that, fruitlessly wiggling the picks back and forth in a rough approximation of lockpicking. The broken lockpick she had stuffed deep into the lock, where it would be difficult to extract, and she was straining, tugging at it. The door opened to the room, and Kuno stiffened for the merest of moments before calming her breathing, and trying to still her racing heart. Her neck muscles quivered as she suppressed the urge to turn her head towards the sound, and she feigned continued deafness. Doggedly, her hooves continued to work at the lock, wiggling the picks back and forth as though trying her very, very best to unlock it. A hoof touched her side, and she yelped, spinning around and stuffing her hooves underneath herself, lowering her nose and thinking of the most embarrassing thing she could. The image of Warden walking in on her as she had her hooves stuffed between her hind legs did it. A faint tinge of red found her cheeks. I wasn't doing anything, Kuno protested weakly, quite obviously wiggling her hooves to try and push the picks under the mattress. This thing is heavy. Warden scowled at her, his eyes narrowing, raising a hoof to point accusingly at the broken pick stuffed in the padlock. Kuno affected the sulkiest tone she could muster. I never was any good at picking locks. Warden snorted once, holding out his hoof wordlessly. Sighing, Kuno made a great show of angrily pulling out the inferior pick and the broken one to place in Warden's hoof, shooting him dirty looks the entire way. Once that was done, she turned her head back to him, huffing. Where'd you get... If you're talking to me, I can't hear you, remember? Kuno stayed smugly, not looking back over her shoulder. There was this growl of anger from behind her, and Kuno suppressed a giggle as Warden stomped off. The door slammed, and then clicked, locked. It was a full minute before the Pegasus returned, shoving open... What's this in my mouth? Nasty. Ew. Shoving open the door and marching over to her, holding up a notepad. Kuno merely turned her head away from it. I'm not reading that. A push at her shoulder made her turn and glower at him. The notepad was pushed almost up against her nose, long enough for her to read. Where did you get them? The notepad was drawn back, and Warden arched an eyebrow at her, crossing his hooves angrily. Kuno snorted once, turning her head. It was several long moments before she spoke, and laughed as haughtily as she could. "Remember the clock? You think I knocked it over on accident?" Warden's eyes narrowed at that, and he looked at the changeling up and down suspiciously. "Yeah, you took the damn pics off me, okay? You win. I'll just die here while you don't have the, and you won't have the worry about your moral compassion and conscience. A moral compass and conscience, sorry." Kuno spat, playing the Pegasus' demonstrated emotions. Ears displaying backwards, Warden withdrew a moment, and then his gaze softened. He started, and then trailed off, sighing, remembering that she couldn't hear him. His voice was small as he continued. "I didn't want for this to happen, but I can't just let you out to ruin ponies' lives." Kuno had to strain to hear it, and she gave no outward indication that she'd heard him. "And you're deaf as a bloody mule," Warden growled, tossing the notepad against the wall in a flurry of annoyance. Jeez. Fuck, I can't get that right, motherfucker. Kuno didn't even move or give any indication that she'd noticed as the Pegasus stormed out, slamming the door behind him. After a minute, she made a show of looking around and acting surprised as she found that he was no longer there. It wasn't until later in the day that Warden came for her again, tether in hoof, his other making a motion for her to give him her collar. Kuno gave a long, suffering sigh and sidled over to him, offering him her throat. Warden clipped the tether to her collar, then tugged it firmly, forcing her to follow him. He led her to the kitchen table, clipping the other end of her tether to the iron ring. Once again, a half a loaf of bread and a bowl of stew were placed in front of her. Kuno looked down at the food, and then up at the Pegasus. The food didn't look that appetizing to her anymore. She was feeding from Warren's faint affection for her, and that was far more filling than stew and bread. But she had to keep up the facade. Snorting once to herself, Kuno began to slowly, laboriously eat her meal, taking longer and longer with each bite, feigning weakness. In truth, it was the strongest she had felt since she had awoken in the field. And Warden had made one huge mistake. When she had collapsed the previous day, he had forgotten to force her to take the Manix-suppressant. Without the muddling effects of the drug, Kuno's mind was clear. She knew exactly what she had to do. Warden looked up as a thud resounded throughout the room. Kuno had hit the floor. Immediately, the Pegasus was moving around the table to check on her again, face twisted with worry. The moment his hooves touched her, Kuno sprang into action. A quick twist of her hooves and a turn of her body, and she had wrapped the rope over Warden's neck. Swiftly, Kuno rolled, dragging the rope with her, pulling the Pegasus over her form and onto his back, and with her rolling atop him. His head hit the floor hard, dazing him, and he blinked unseeingly at the ceiling for several seconds. Kuno took the opportunity to cross the rope over his throat and hold it there, squeezing and tightening. Warden realized his peril too late, scrabbling at her frantically with his forehooves. Kuno merely held her face away from the flailing limbs until the Pegasus went limp. Fuck. The changeling stared down at him, holding the rope. All she had to do was keep squeezing, holding the blood from reaching his brain. He would die in seconds. Or she could even twist and yank the rope and kill him. But something stopped her. Gently, Kuno released the rope, letting it relax. She checked the Pegasus' pulse and made sure he was breathing. and then set about freeing herself. In 7 minutes, Kuno was free, unlocking her collar and then staring down at the form of the unconscious Pegasus with a sly grin. Oh, Kuno, you sly bitch. Warden returned to consciousness slowly. His head throbbed, and his wings were uncomfortable. One moment. He tried to move them, only to find that they were bound. He struggled slightly, eyes flicking open, and he blinked rapidly, shaking his head. His entire body was bound in rope. His neck jingled faintly. A red collar with a bell was affixed to his neck. The rope tether was attached to it and padlocked in place. Kuno gently pushed at Warden's head with her hoofs to get his attention. "You bitch!" the Pegasus spat up at her. "Language!" Kuno chided, bopping him on the nose with a hoof and idly taking a bite of the loaf of bread she had held on her free hoof. "Sorry about the rope, by the way, but you're a big, strapping stallion. Wouldn't want you breaking free now, would we?" "You can hear me." You can hear me," Warden stated flatly, glowering up at her. "How astute," Kuno said with a wry grin. "Any other revelations you'd like to share?" "I'm going to kill you," Warden growled, his tone menacing. Now, hun, if you were going to do that, you had ample opportunity. Let's just skip the foreplay and get right down to the heart of the matter. I'm a changeling. You're a pony. You're supposed to want to kill me, but you really don't want to. In fact, it's because of your affection for me that I can hear again." The changeling took a step closer to the Pegasus, and then placed a hoof on his chest, peering down at him intensely. "And that intrigues me. So while I have a captive audience, I intend to sate my curiosity." "Go to hell!" Warden retorted, struggling against his bonds again. Kuno sighed once, shaking her head. "This really will go easier if you cooperate. You spared me, and if you tell me what I want to know, I might even spare you." "Go to hell," Warden bit off, trying his best to push her hoof with his chest. "Oh, come now. This is going to get tiresome very quickly." Kuno tilted her head down at the pony, and then pursed her lips. I didn't want to do this, but you leave me little choice." Kuno aimed her horn at the Pegasus, and let her magic flow out, a green beam of light hitting him square between the eyes. He convulsed, crying out once, and then went still and quiet. The changeling peered at the Pegasus, grinning and leaning in closer, trailing a hoof along his cheek. His eyes were green and vacant under her spell, and even though she felt the energy reserves teetering on painfully empty again, Kuno smiled. "Let's find out what makes you tick," she whispered. And with that, there's the end of Chapter 4 of An Affliction of the Heart. Plans really do come to fruition, don't they, Kuno? Let's see what you'll do with this little Pegasus. Nightlife out.